Okay, so we were at sort of linking up from the last week, whatever we had discussed. So as we had concluded in Operation Black Thunder 2, I was telling you, which was conducted by the National Security Guards, supported by Punjab Police and CRPF at that time. It was a very good operation. All the lessons that were learned from Operation Blue Star, which Army had done in 1984, those lessons were applied over here. Force was used to the minimal. They cut off the complete Golden Temple, disconnected the electricity, disconnected the water supply, put a very strict cordon around it. They deployed all these snipers, those people जो बिल्कुल accurate firing करते हैं अपने long range weapons से, and they were able to start doing some pinpoint targeting of terrorists who were at vantage points at various points in the Golden Temple. So after the first couple of terrorists were taken out, then they started making announcements suggesting that or encouraging the people, the terrorists who were holed up inside, to start surrendering. So when that happened, initially some people surrendered. After that, there was some reaction. Some negotiation kept taking place, and eventually the Operation Black Thunder came out to be a very successful operation. But where I think the mistake was made is that the whole operation was kept restricted only to the Golden Temple. By that time, after Blue Star 1984, when a whole lot of youth from Punjab had gone across to Pakistan and started getting trained there by the ISI and were being sent back again, the infestation, that means जो आकर के जो फैल जाते हैं, the infestation of terrorists in the border districts, especially starting from the north, Gurdaspur, Amritsar, Firozpur and all, was quite a bit. So despite the advice from various security quarters that the operation should be followed up or carried out simultaneously in these border districts also, for political reasons, they decided not to do that. So therefore, although Black Thunder by itself was a big success, but it did not make so much of a difference in the overall situation. So that is where we had left it last week. So today we will take it forward from Black Thunder 2, and like always, I will take you through with the help of with the help of a presentation. Just give me a minute. I'll bring it into that slide sharing mode. Yeah. Okay, so I assume all of you can see the slide in front of you. So the first, after Black Thunder, the first major operation which was undertaken, this was in the month of March, soon after the winters have subsided, in March 1989, a colossal combined force operation was carried out in the area of what do you call it, the Mand area. Now this is the Mand area which you can see around the river Bias in the area of Jandiala, Kapurthala, Tarantaran, these areas. Basically, Mand areas are those low-lying areas and where there is a very thick undergrowth, typically that undergrowth called Sarkanda growth, which is over there. And so that is how this whole, terrorists were able to hide themselves there and set up their so-called caches, जहाँ पर हथियार वगैरह सब जमा करके रखते हैं. So all that were there. So in March 1989, a colossal combined force operation was carried out, in which they used people from Punjab Police, from the Border Security Force, from the Central Reserve Police Force, massive cordon search in this marshy land, which is adjoining the Bias River and parts of Satluj River in Amritsar, Firozpur, and also Jalandhar, Kapurthala, Ajnala, Jandiala, Batala, and Tarantaran districts. Now, these cordon search operations, they led to many arrests and recovery of arms, ammunition, and explosives. and some very good intelligence-based operations. That is basically they use the spotters. People जो मदद करते हैं terrorist को पहचानने के लिए, they use spotters to identify the terrorist and eliminate them. So this sustained pressure जो दबाव था इन operations का मांड area में, it almost was able to reduce two of the major terrorist groups, in fact, three of them. One is called the Bhindranwale Tiger Force of Khalistan. That was reduced quite a bit. The Khalistan Liberation Organization and the Babbar Khalsa significantly. Now, once this happened, so just as the terrorist, strength started to come down, it started having impact on the political side as well. So then, in 1989, a split took place in the Panthik Committee, which was the political control over the terrorist groups. A split took place. So the first was, the old group, which was controlled by Gurbachan Singh Mano Chahal, that and this Vasan Singh Zafarwal, that split. So that was the first split which took place. And let's go to the next slide. Then there was a third split which took place. So in other words, the Panthik Committee got divided into three. Because of this division, they were hardly able to exercise much control. And in the process, what happened, a lot of these terrorist leaders, they decided to locate themselves in Pakistan. And having gone over there, they were hardly able to make any effect over the cadres. So now these terrorist cadres were there, with their weapons, etc. So instead of terrorist activity, now they started indulging in criminal activities like, extorting money from people and all kinds of criminal activities they started indulging in. And side by side, there were also reports of rape, reports of coercion, reports of murder, and so on. And the other thing that started, because these Panthik group had divided, so some sort of, इनके groups के आपस में लड़ाई, what is typically described in English as turf battles. So that kind of turf battle started between the Panthik Committee of Mano Chahal and the other Panthik Committee which was there amongst themselves. Now this Panthik Committee, which is of Mano Chahal, their cadres were primarily drawn from the rural areas. Basically, गांव के इलाके से इनके cadre आते थे. And the other Panthik Committee, that is the SS, they were being drawn from the urban and the semi-urban areas. So now that was yet another, major divide. So this SS, the Sohan Singh Panthik Committee, they were a little more, shall we say, into specific targeting, to picking up police people, picking up the families of police people and so on. Whereas the one, Mano Chahal one, which was from the urban areas, that were rural areas, sorry, they were more indiscriminate in their acts and more bent on creating some kind of chaos, मतलब माहौल को बिगाड़ के रखने का, जैसे इसे बोलते हैं. So anyway, so now the Pakistanis on the ISI handlers on the other side, they were very keen to somehow, help these people to consolidate and come together once again. But I think the conflict and the split which was there amongst themselves, आपस में, which is in English we use a word called internecine, आपसी जो conflict होती है, the internecine conflict was quite a bit, and slowly as criminalism started to come in, the conflict started from political grounds, but it now turned out to become more of a conflict amongst each other over the revenues, that is the पैसा जो ये लोग कमाते थे from gun running, मतलब हथियारों की जो स्मगलिंग से, और नार्कोटिक्स यानी कि ड्रग्स के ट्रेड, वो जो है उसमें चालू हो गया. So actually speaking, if you see, in many ways, these were probably the early days of what we keep hearing about the narcotics trade, which is now of course affected many parts of Punjab. You all may have seen also some films which are made on this. Anyway, getting back to what was happening that time. So by mid-1989, gradually the popular support for the terrorists started to decline because they were indulging in all these kind of criminal activities. And by and large, people started resisting. One clear incident of this is available. I'm showing it in the next slide. So on 6th June 1989, one bus was hijacked, in Majitha area. So what the terrorists did, they told the Hindu passengers to get down from the bus. So just as these Hindu passengers were forcibly offloaded and nearly killed, two young Sikh boys, two young youthful fellows, one by the name of Avtar Singh and the other by the name of Rajwant Singh, they decided to stop these terrorists. It is sad that both of them were killed by the terrorists, but they really fought the terrorists quite hard, and both of them were quite heavily wounded first, and baad mein, of course, both of them passed away. Avtar and Rajwant Singh, I must mention, both, of course, in their early 20s, they were very eager to join the army, and they were both those Amritdhari Sikhs, if you remember, I had told in the very beginning of part one yesterday. Now, Rajwant's father was an army veteran, retired from the army, and Avtar's father was in the border security force. So this was, we were seeing a change which was happening where public started to now resist and counter the terrorist. Before this, there was popular support. Popular support declined, but still people would not come up and resist. But 6 June 1989, this hijack incident, I think, was the first time when people started to resist and started to oppose. The public anger was of quite disgust and anger against the terrorists from across Punjab, all over Punjab. This was quite badly criticized. Again, after about a month or so, the terrorists, they tried to carry out another indiscriminate firing incident and in Taran Taran district. This time around, again, the shop owners of Taran Taran, they decided to give it back to the terrorists. उन्होंने पकड़ के terrorists को मारना शुरू किया. So within a month, we saw one incident in the area of Majitha and another incident in the area of Taran Taran when the public started to counter the terrorists, which was, I think, a very good sign. Now, inspired by this, a good decision was taken by the security forces, that is to create the village defense scheme, because once the public starts resisting the terrorists, it is possible to create some sort of security network from amongst the people itself. So basically what they did, they enrolled some special police officers called SPOs. This term is used even now in parts of Jammu and Kashmir and all. So they appointed these special police officers from amongst the local youth who could oppose the terrorists. So therefore they were armed, they were trained, and they were expected to operate in their respective village, and in some cases little more than in a village, maybe in their local areas. Now these SPOs were given the old .303 rifles, and as the time progressed, within about a year or so, almost 451 villages in Punjab had local SPOs, special police officers, countering the terrorists, which was, I think, a very good sign. And in this were the lessons that kept getting applied now, even later in Jammu and Kashmir also. We introduced the concept of SPOs and all, but this was happening that time. Anyway, under this mounting pressure of counter-terrorist operation, a lot of these hardcore terrorists, they left Punjab and went to the Tarai region in Uttar Pradesh, where there is a settlement of the Sikh population. So they went there and sought shelter. And by this time, the terrorists also realized that it is not going to work, the way as we are expecting things to work. Now, this messaging went across to Pakistan also. And if you remember, when we were discussing the Jammu and Kashmir, I had covered it at some length over there, how after the withdrawal of the Soviet Union armed forces from Afghanistan in mid-1989, started in February, took almost a year for the whole withdrawal to take place. But by about mid-1989, one is, of course, as the Soviet Union withdrew, Pakistan, first of all, they had a great sense of victory, that we have been able to defeat superpower by jihad. And second thing is, now they were free to divert their complete attention towards India. If you remember, in Jammu and Kashmir series, I had also spoken about an operation called Operation Topak, which was, sort of conceived by Zia, who was the head of Pakistan that time. And that was to create insurgencies in India, support insurgencies in India, and then at the opportune moment try to wrest control. So they had increased their compass, they had increased the area in which they were operating to include both Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. So as a part of that, AK-47s, they started coming into uh, Punjab. They started coming into shall we say Jammu and Kashmir. So these AK-47s started coming out, and for the first time, in April and May of that year itself, there was a major confiscation which took place of explosives, plastic explosive, and some advanced timer device like detonator, etc., along the border with Pakistan. So you could clearly see that in 1989, as the Soviet Union was withdrawing from Afghanistan, Pakistan was reinforcing their complete efforts in Punjab and Jammu and Kashmir. So, what was Pakistan's strategy? Pakistan was wanting to reinvigorate the insurrection in Punjab combined with Jammu and Kashmir. At this time, if you remember again in the beginning of part one, I had said that Punjab has a boundary of 533 kilometers of international border with Pakistan. So at that time, the work on fencing, which is, if for those of you who have traveled that side, you may have seen the complete border is fenced. At that time, by about August 1989, only about 1/5 of the complete area was fenced. So therefore, it was quite a free movement which was taking place from Pakistan into India, and primarily from Pakistan point of view, the whole thing was being executed with some urgency. The reason for that, in 1989, as I said, on the one side, Soviet Union was withdrawing from Afghanistan, and so therefore they said Pakistan felt that this is the right time to get at India. And on Indian side, at this point in time, we were quite heavily involved in Sri Lanka. श्रीलंका में जब राजीव गांधी वाज द प्राइम मिनिस्टर, उन्होंने एक अकॉर्ड साइन की थी श्रीलंका के साथ में, बेस्ड ऑन विच इंडिया डिप्लॉयड व्हाट इज कॉल्ड एन इंडियन पीस कीपिंग फोर्स इन श्रीलंका. उसमें इंडिया का लगभग 4 डिवीजन, मतलब इट्स अ ह्यूज फोर्स, 4 डिवीजन साइज फोर्स, ऑलमोस्ट 1.5 लाख करीब इंडियन आर्मी पीपल वर डिप्लॉयड इन श्रीलंका. सो देयरफॉर पाकिस्तान इज कैलकुलेटेड कि एक तो हिंदुस्तान के सारी रिजर्व्स जो हैं वो श्रीलंका में है. अब सोवियत यूनियन वहां से चली गई तो पाकिस्तान के जो 2 कोर डिप्लॉयड थे ऑन द वेस्टर्न फ्रंट, 11 and 12 corps, they became free to come this side. So they thought this is the right time to get at India. And at the same time, they were also very keen to induct as many people as possible into the Parliament of India by election as member of Parliament, people who were sympathetic to the cause in Jammu and Kashmir, people who were sympathetic to the cause in Punjab. So they were trying, how can they prop up these people to sort of win elections in India. So एक side से political control भी करेंगे, and other side they will be able to win over the situation militarily. So that was Pakistan's broad strategy. So now Pakistan, they set up a number of terrorist training camps, sometimes as close as 75 meters from the international border. As I said, the border was not fenced. So basically now from the government of India side, they tried to see how can they bring in some, political control into the situation. And similarly, from the terrorist side, from the Pakistani side, they were trying to see how can they bring in some fresh political drive into the movement. So the All India Sikh Students Federation was being propped up to supplement the terrorist and subversive activities which were taking place. So All India Sikh Students Federation, they joined hands along with Simranjeet Singh Maan, United Akali Dal, which was known for its pro-terrorist activities. So the All India Sikh Students Federation, they went and joined hand with them. Now this coalition backed the contestants who were participating in the elections, and they won almost 10 out of the 13 parliamentary seats which were there in Punjab. Now, on the one side, this is what happened. On the other side, Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi, before he was, demitting office as Prime Minister, he freed this fellow Simranjit Singh Maan and Atinder Pal Singh of All India Sikh Students Federation. Now, this had quite a retrograde, quite a iska काफी बुरा असर पड़ा on the situation on the ground. Anyway, so on 6 December 1989, VP Singh was sworn in as the Prime Minister. And when I was talking about Jammu and Kashmir, you may recall, I had said 3 days later, the daughter of the Home Minister, Mufti Muhammad Saeed, Rubia Saeed, she was kidnapped. And in order to secure her release, 5 Kashmiri terrorists were set free. So when the government of India released 5 terrorists against this kidnapping, so this sort of, gave a fillip to the terrorists. They thought that you can get away by doing such acts. So that also had quite an impact, on this situation in Punjab as much as in Jammu and Kashmir. So on the ground, because of this, vacillation of the government, ki kabhi ye, kabhi wo, never sure about what to do. Suddenly these, if you remember, 10 out of 13, as I said, member of parliament who got elected, who were from the United Akali Dal, Simranjit Singh Maan, supported by All India Sikh Student Federation. So these people, when they saw the government vacillating, in this manner, like releasing terrorists to secure the release of the daughter of the Home Minister and all that, so they became more active. They started supporting Khalistan, some of them very, very openly. A lot of street agitation were seen, demonstration, protest, and at the same time, they were trying to subvert people who are in the government of Punjab, people who are in the government of India, and so on. And around the same time, you could see a whole lot of human rights activists, suddenly becoming very, very active and bringing out all kinds of stories. So yesterday, when I was addressing that group, as I was telling you of the parliamentary legislative assistants, so some of them asked questions which are taken straight out of the media based on the reports of human rights activists. So this is what happens. Most of them are being supported, with some terrorist organizations, with some organizations with vested interests, whether they are being driven from Pakistan side, from China side, whether they are being driven by some vested interests of multinational corporations and so on. But ultimately, these human rights activists were creating quite a lot of problems for the situation on the ground. So the political parties, the political leaders, human rights activists, all of them making noise, false noise on the same thing that can create quite a confusion on the ground. Anyway, so now there were several, attempts at political leaders. There was an attempt to kill Gurcharan Singh Tora, the president of Shiromani Gurdwara Prabandhak Committee. I had explained this to you last time, SGPC. And the Balwant Singh, one former Deputy Chief Minister and Finance Minister of Punjab, he was killed. And in that 1 year, almost 506 police people, Punjab police people mostly, and mostly of the junior ranks, they were killed. Because of this bad situation, by September 1990, the president's rule was extended in Punjab. So now, once the president's rule was extended, there was, some sort of a relief because the local state government could not make much of a difference, and it gave the opportunity to the security forces to be able to take some more firm steps. Anyway, so on 8th November 1990, after 11 months in office, VP Singh's government, it collapsed. That is another political history. We can go there whenever time permits. But as of now, suffice to understand that VP Singh ki sarkar gir gayi and Chandrasekhar became the prime minister. But he was with a minority government supported by the Congress from outside. So in other words, Congress ki marji ke mutabik inko chalna tha. In Punjab, the situation continued to worsen. On 14th May, there was this incident which I mentioned regarding Tora and others. So by and large, the moderates were completely squeezed out of the, moderate Akalis were completely squeezed out of the political space. And similarly, most of the other national parties, whether it is Congress, in those days, Jan Sangh and others, they had almost shut their shop out of fear. So under these circumstances, they decided to induct the army once again. So in November 1990, Op Rakshak 1 was launched in Punjab. And this time, of course, they had kept the army's deployment only along the international border. So the aim which was set out for the Op Rakshak was to check the infiltration of terrorists and weapons which was taking place from Pakistan, and any exfiltration that people might try to go from India to Pakistan. So that was the primary aim. And side by side, the army also sort of took it upon itself that they will take actions to instill confidence in the local population and create an environment, माहौल को इस तरह से बनाओ कि लोकल सिविल एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, जैसे अपने तहसीलदार हो गए, डिस्ट्रिक्ट कलेक्टर हो गए, तो तहसील ऑफिस होती है, ये सब जो है काम करना बंद हो गया था. So army said that okay fine, at least along the border districts where we are deployed, we will create a situation by which these offices are in a position to function. Incidentally, I must mention to you, this is the time when I was myself deployed there in the border district in Taran Taran in a place called Chawal as a company commander in those days. So we have indulged, I have had the opportunity to participate in these operations myself for almost 3 years. Anyway, so now almost as we started getting, relieved from Sri Lanka, we started our withdrawal from sometime in end 1989 after the new government came into power in the center. Once we started withdrawing from Sri Lanka, Indian Army was able to deploy more people here. So roughly you can say, about 5 infantry divisions were deployed in the 3 border districts, which is quite a dense deployment. Most of the army was deployed for checking infiltration. Punjab ki border mein, army has got their defenses based on what is called the ditch cum band. एक बंद है जिसके ऊपर अपने पोजीशंस होते हैं और एक खड्डा बेसिकली बनाया जाता है ताकि टैंक जो है हमारे डिफेंसेस के नजदीक ना आ पाए. तो that sort of arrangement is there. So based on this ditch cum band, the counter infiltration people were deployed, and in the immediate depth, which is called hinterland, the counter terrorist operations were carried out. And side by side, a massive civic action program was also undertaken to make sure that the people start gaining confidence. Now that it had very good effect. You can make out there was a letter written by Mr. Vasant Singh Zafarwal, the terrorist leader of the Zafarwal group from Pakistan, where he's telling his people that they are having serious problems now recruiting people because of the intense deployment of the army, the civic action, etc. That alienation, जो एक खौफ जो feeling आ गई थी alienation के लोगों में, that was going down. So therefore they were not being able to recruit the people, and also because of the counter infiltration deployment of the army, they were not able to send people across into Pakistan. So there it was. Things started to work. Now, because these actions were proving to be quite successful, so at that time, if you remember, it is the president's rule. The governor of Punjab was one General O.P. Malhotra. So General O.P. Malhotra suggested that we should progressively deploy the army even in some of the hinterland districts so that the situation can be made easy for the Punjab police to work. But the state administration was against this army deployment, and similarly the Chandrasekhar government in the center by this time decided that they will hold the elections in Punjab along with the rest of the country, which was the midterm elections were due in June 1991. They decided, okay, fine, we will hold elections to the state government in Punjab, for the state in Punjab, and replace president's rule with elected people. Now, by this time, the terrorist groups, they decided also that, okay, fine, in order to be able to be more effective, they must participate in the elections. But then the thing was quite divided. Like some terrorist groups, primarily those who are owing allegiance to the Panthik Committee of Sohan Singh, that SS group, they decided to boycott. The others who were followers of the Damdami Taksal decided to participate. So as the dates of nomination got closer, those who had decided to boycott earlier, they also started to put up some proxy candidates so that they did not have lose control completely over the power. But the situation actually, because of this decision of not extending the deployment into the districts of the hinterland, that is, other than the border districts of Gurdaspur, Amritsar, and Firozpur, the situation started to get out of control. As you can see on the slide in front of you, because of the army's withdrawal, almost incidents were happening at very close frequency. On 7 June 1991, there was an attack on the Minister of State for Home, Subodh Khan Suhai, and on 15 June. And then there was that infamous train incident in which near Ludhiana, in which 27 candidates were killed. So that's how, about 100 passengers were killed. And in the process, 27 candidates also were killed at different places. So that's the kind of situation which was prevailing over there. 21st May 1991, Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated by the LTT, the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam bombers in Tamil Nadu. This was a reaction of LTT against Rajiv Gandhi for having signed the Sri Lanka Accord and deployed the Indian Army in Sri Lanka. So Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated, and a month later, Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister of India. Moment Narasimha Rao became the Prime Minister of India, he took some firm steps. First, he said that this elections in Punjab will not be held now. We will postpone the elections, which was a good decision because at least the security forces needed some time to bring the situation under control. So that was a good first step that he had taken. The next thing which they did is to progressively now take control of the situation in the hinterland. Because in the border districts, because of what the army deployment, there was a significant decline in the number of civilian casualties and so on. And they decided to extend it now into the hinterland. While this is on the security side, on the political side, actually the Akali parties had become totally marginalized and by this situation. So these various political and terrorist groups interlinked with each other, and the a lot of fights that was taking place amongst themselves. So this, literally speaking, left no scope for negotiations to take place. And in those 2 years between 1990 and 91, the governance had completely collapsed in Punjab. There was no public order. The terrorist threat was running through the rural and semi-urban areas, and governments in exile were set up. One in the United Kingdom, some in Canada, some in the US. Even now, if you see, along with the farmers' protest, it is those same people from there who continue to make almost similar noises. So that's why it is important to see how these vested interests from those so-called NRIs, non-resident Indians, are affecting the security situation in the country. Anyway, so the situation had deteriorated enough for Prime Minister Narasimha Rao to take the decision of going in for a much larger scale deployment of the army. So therefore happened Operation Rakshak. So Operation Rakshak 2 started in November 1991. Again, I was part of this operation also. So the orders which were given to the army were very clear, that you will restore order and prepare the ground for elections in mid-February, because that is the time when the next 6 months of the president's rule was going to end. So time was given to the army and of course all the other security forces that between now and mid-February, the situation has to be brought under control. So therefore, a lot of intense activities took place. And by this time, the security forces also had the lessons of Rakshak 1 and the earlier the operations that were taking place in bits and pieces. So what the first thing that they did is, between the army, the Punjab police and the central armed police forces, some good integrated command structures were set up. what they did, some senior Punjab police officers were attached to various headquarters of the army. For example, there was an officer of the IG rank who was permanently positioned with our Indian Army's headquarters 11 Corps in Jalandhar, and similarly in the other places. Then there were DIG rank officers who were placed in the divisional headquarters. Let's say Amritsar headquarters 15D, they placed a DIG, and likewise with the others. And the senior superintendent of police was placed along with the brigade headquarters and so on. So this ensured that there was very good coordination which was taking place at the headquarter level. Then at the ground level, like just in my battalion, from 3rd Battalion of the Assam Regiment, in Chabal, we had a police squad which was permanently attached to us. So we knew those police people, about 15, 16 of them by name, and they would come along with us for all operations and all. It was a big help because they knew the area very well. Plus, they were very much more conversant with the language and so on. So this coordination between the police and the army, I think, was very nice. And then as the senior officers were positioned in the headquarters and police squads were there with the battalions, so there was a much better sharing of intelligence. जो लोकल आकर के आर्मी को बताने से झिझकते हैं, लोकल पुलिस को आगे फिर भी बताते हैं. So therefore, this sharing of intelligence worked very nicely. And so in a way, if you see, from a situation where after sunset, that means अंधेरा होने के बाद में पुलिस अपने थानों से बिल्कुल बाहर नहीं निकलती थी उससे पहले. Now, because army started getting deployed, we used to put ambushes at multiple places, all over the areas of our areas of responsibility. Any kind of movement was being checked. On the road, there was to be this road nakas. So very, very intense deployment, round-the-clock operations going on. So slowly the police started gaining confidence. When they started getting confidence, they started doing patrolling. When they started doing patrolling, they were meeting their old contacts. And when they were meeting their old contacts, they were able to get the intelligence. And in these counter-terrorist operations, intelligence is of prime importance. Very shortly, we will start your series in which we will tell you about intelligence from the officers of intelligence. They will come and tell you. So you'll be taught in some detail on how intelligence affects these operations. But a point is, some very good, coordinated activity took place. So now, by the time elections came close, I remember in January, February, we distributed our companies in almost, 8 or 10 sections and deployed them all over the place. My company, I remember, was deployed from the area called village Dhand Kasel all the way to Sohal, Chapan, right up to going up to the border, coordinating with the unit which was deployed on the border for counter infiltration. So that's how an extensive network was put out. And when the army got deployed like this, so police became free to provide security to the candidates. If you remember in the previous slide, I had shown you how many candidates, 27 of them had been died. So once every candidate was provided anything between 5 to 15 people to secure him, the candidates were also feeling quite confident to come out, whether it is he or she were confident to come out, go campaigning. It was quite interesting. Earlier, they would wind up the campaign by about 3, 4 o'clock, but when they started getting security, when they started seeing army deployed all over the place, they were campaigning late into the evening. So progressively, situation was made pretty good. And now you could see a change happening in the situation. And by November 1991, from thousands, the civilians killed in terrorist attacks dropped to about 154. So this also would improve further, but that is the kind of improvement in the situation that took place. Now, when these terrorists were unable to carry out their terrorist act, so now what did they do? They completely put all their resources supported by Pakistan in carrying out propaganda. They started distributing all over the place those leaflet, handbill, posters. Jagah jagah poster lag jate the to scare people that if you come out and vote, you will be killed. Warning would be given to so and so. So all kinds of things would do, and there were some of these vernacular local newspapers. They were carrying press notes, statements, advertisements, all trying to disrupt the elections. Well, anyway, except for an incident where 3 teachers nominated as election officials were killed, and another one on the following day, by and large, the elections could take place. And in 1992, we had an elected government in place. On 25th February 1992, Byan Singh took office as the chief minister. Now, one good thing which was done because of the firm position that Prime Minister Narasimha Rao took in the center, and Byan Singh took office as the chief minister, they decided that the counter-terrorist framework, जो एक deployment करके जो एक framework जो बनाया गया था, they will not disturb that. They will allow that counter-terrorist framework to be in place and then start bringing up the institutions of democratic governance. So that was very important, and I think every time we have tried to immediately after the elections, moment you have a elected government, as I was telling you in Punjab as well as other areas, this tendency is, acha ji, abhi band kar do, withdraw the army, leave it to the people, start releasing the terrorists, giving amnesty and all that. It doesn't work. So therefore, I think it was a good decision by Narasimha Rao in the center and Byan Singh in Punjab that they said the counter-terrorist framework is going to continue, and side by side, we will see how to get the democratic institutions to start working. By democratic institutions, meaning panchayat, the MLAs going to their respective areas, and so on and so forth. So once that happened, so army, what they instead of that, fully deployed, as I was mentioning to you, one company deploying 8 to 10 posts, we withdrew ourselves and concentrated into those company bases, battalion bases. And since by that time the Punjab police had gained sufficient confidence, so they came out with some very good techniques for identifying terrorists. So very, very precise operations we were carrying out at various places to be able to reach the correct house, correct time, pick up the terrorist, if there is an encounter, eliminate the terrorist, and do that. So slowly you could see the people also, psychologically transforming, and the terrorist support was waning, and sort of dip it took place in the recruitment for the terrorists. So now if you see, I think some of the important points that come out from the manner in which this operation was held, as I told you, I think you have to give due credit to the resolution of the central government led by Prime Minister Narasimha Rao to allow the terrorist framework, counter-terrorist framework to be in place till such time as the democratic processes could resume. Second, it is to the credit of the state government of Punjab that they did not follow that standard pattern, as I said, now that the elections have happened, so release the people who are arrested and then give them amnesty and again upset the situation. So luckily, because of this, resolute action of the central and the state government, I think things worked pretty nicely. Now, because this particular framework remained in place and the terrorists were not able to carry out what they wanted to carry out, what did we start seeing? A lot of factionalism, मतलब आपस में अकालीज वगैरह के टूट-फूट हो गई, and similarly along with them the terrorist groups also started to splinter amongst each other. So all these things help in improving the situation, and of course I mentioned to you in some detail the close coordination which was taking place between the army and the police, that helped quite a bit. So slowly the number of incidents started to reduce. Post-elections, we could see the killing of police personnel, which was there. That also came down a little bit. Well, from what we had seen, almost 160 the previous year. And before that, I had told you around 506 people killed in 1 year. It was down to roughly around 51 killed, which is bad, but that was the kind of reduction in terrorist violence against the police in a span of just about 2 years. So if you look at the strategy which the armed forces had deployed, basically what they did, security forces had deployed, that the state was literally physically isolated. Along the border, the counter-infiltration I told you, and along the borders with the neighboring states, because post Op Rakshak 1, a lot of these terrorists, as I told you, had gone across from Punjab to the Terai region in Uttar Pradesh, Then some of them have gone to neighboring Haryana and so on. So they were able to, security forces had physically completely isolated the state. And because of this good intelligence-based operations and side by side, building the self-defense capabilities like those SPOs, special police officers I told you in the village, all of it put together, I think situation improved. And you could see that the good coordination which was there amongst all the intelligence agencies and side by side, the state machinery, taking its correct place in the administration of the state, all of it put together actually helped the situation quite a bit. Now, if you see in terms of the number of civilians, who were killed due to terrorist activities, this also came down substantially. By 1993, from almost 2,000, 3,000 killed in one full year in 1993, the number of terrorists killed came down to 48. And then by September 1992, the municipal committee elections were held, in which the voter turnout went up to almost 75%. And then in January 1993, when they had the panchayat elections, the voter turnout went up to 82%. I'm bringing out all this to tell you that how progressively the democratic, institutions of panchayats, municipal committees, they started to take place. And the idea of the Khalsa Panchayat, which was being propagated by the terrorists all through the late 80s and 1990-91, that was replaced by the normal village panchayat and so on. And one good thing is by this time, a lot of opportunities were given to the terrorists to surrender. In fact, the number of surrenders by end of 1992 had touched almost 537. I was party to many of these, surrender activities that were there. And in 1993, another 379, they gave up their arms. And by and large, there was a sense of relief. Now, if you see in the broader context, I think Mizoram, which we will talk about as I start touching upon the Northeast, and Punjab, these two stand out as two distinct campaigns where India has successfully, brought an end to the counterinsurgency and counterterrorism. So that definitely, I think, is something that we have to see as good lessons, number one. Number two, we have to see that it does not get back to that situation again. In Punjab, I think it took us almost 15 years from start to finish to put an end to this. And attempt by Pakistan, which is taking place from time to time to revive the Khalistan movement, is something that we have to watch. And the support which comes from outside, I think that is also that's also something that we should be conscious of. Now, I think due credit must be given to Narasimha Rao's approach that he had taken, that give enough freedom of action to the security forces so that they are able to stabilize the situation, and having stabilized the situation, conduct the assembly elections, and then let the counterterrorism operations continue till the terrorists are marginalized and they are given an opportunity to surrender and join the mainstream. So I think this was a classic case of security forces stabilizing the situation and the government coming in along at the same time to bring about a political situation that came via these elections. So all in all, I think it was a very good operation that took place and concluded in the manner in which I have just, explained to you. But as we go into the future, I think it is very important to be sensitive to what has happened in the past and how did it happen in the past. I think that is very, very important. Okay, and we have to be very conscious of the fact that this is a very sensitive border state, which has seen, as I said in the very beginning, the worst of partition. It has seen three major wars affecting it and all the sensitivities that go with it. Now it has gone through this process. This has to be kept secure. Even now, quite often you hear of, some news item is coming of drugs being pushed into Punjab. Then you keep hearing of explosives being, dumped across the fence. Then sometime in 2019, 2020, we've had a couple of reports where drones were used to drop arms in various parts of Punjab. So I think that is something which we have to be very careful about. And equally, I think it is we have to be conscious of this great risk of narcotic terror. On 29 June 2019, India's custom authorities, they had seized a massive narcotics consignment at the Atari-Wagah border. And once it was done, 532 kg of heroin was, discovered from there. And look at the thing now. The 532 kg of heroin was coming in through the Atari-Wagah border, but the money for this was being paid by some terrorist group in J&K. So all these linkages which are there, and with Pakistan's ISI sitting right behind, I think we have to be very, very cautious for three, I think, important links. One is narcotic terror. Second is trying to smuggle in weapons. And third, I think, is this social media campaign, which is directed at radicalization of the Sikh youth, which is being undertaken by pro-Khalistan people in Pakistan, in US, UK, and Canada, and some other countries. So I think if we are able to take care of these three things, we should find that the situation is brought under control. So on this note, I will stop over here now, and we will open up the house for questions or any discussion that you might have. You can ask questions from any time, part 1, part 2, or what is happening currently. What is the chance of one thing affecting the other? Yeah, over to you, sir. Got it.
Thank you so much, sir. Okay, anyone who has any questions? Anyone who has any questions, please go ahead and ask. Yes.
Bhatia, please raise his hand.
Sir, good morning, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, my question was with regard to how the de-radicalization process happened after the culmination of terrorism in Punjab. In Punjab, we managed to de-radicalize a generation of youth so that terrorism is completely stamped out. Whatever little remains on the fringe, and is usually from Canada and UK and other sources. Sir, what lessons can be drawn from the Punjab experience which we can replicate in, say, Jammu and Kashmir, where still there is a presence of youth who want to cross over, who want to join the terrorist organizations?
Okay, thank you. That's a good question, Abhinav. I say it's a good question because, in Punjab, what had happened, if you recall, when I was mentioning to you, once the split in the Panthik committee took place, and post this is around September 1989, by the time they had become from 1 to 2 to 3. And most of the leaders, they went across to Pakistan. And by and large, they had lost control over their groups in India. So once they lost control over their groups in India, these people, they degenerated from terrorist to criminal activities. And they were indulging in things like rape, extortion, all kinds of criminal activities. So this had quite an effect on the population. And if you ask me, to a large extent, the de-radicalization process came from within the population rather than somebody trying to, sort of impose some de-radicalization measure from outside. Okay. And slowly as things started progressing, as I gave you in my narration, there would be some dips, but it was recovering. There would be some dips, it was recovering. And primarily those dips were coming because of an unstable government in the center, from Rajiv Gandhi to VP Singh to Chandrasekhar. So in this period, Rajiv Gandhi, before he left office, in order to woo the Akali Dal, what did he do? He released Simranjit Singh Mann. He released that All India Sikh Students Federation of Atinder Pal and others. So moment they got released, they went and vitiated the situation on the ground. Now after that, VP Singh came to power. VP Singh, he was caught in all those trappings of the Mandal movement and all that. So he hardly had any time for Punjab, but then So the easier thing for him was to keep wooing these anti-national elements. So he also did something like that. Chandrasekhar made the blunder of saying that we will have the assembly elections along with the by-elections of the center. They were getting their act together, and moment they got a little strong, sort of support from the center, as was evident in Narasimha Rao's government, so they were able to bring the situation, take the situation to stability for conduct of the elections. And I think those elections, I tried to tell you in some detail. I mean, like as a company commander, my company was deployed over, I think, 10 posts of 10 people each, covering a huge area. And every day and night, we were constantly on the, on operations throughout, showing your visibility everywhere. So once the armed forces start security forces start showing such intense deployment, so people start gaining confidence and the number of terrorist incidents reduce. So therefore, the radicalization reduces. Okay. And even though it was a combination of religion with a terrorist movement driven by a religious cause. But somewhere, if you ask me, I'm not very sure if the religious leaders were much convinced beyond a point. So therefore, the people who help in causing intense radicalization, those people also kind of started to back off. So progressively, despite all the effect which was coming from Pakistan or the people from abroad, like you're saying, it did not have that kind of effect. Okay, so now your last part of your question, can we replicate this? Obviously, we can't replicate this, but can we take lessons from this? The answer is yes. And how do you take lessons from this into Jammu and Kashmir, for example? In Jammu and Kashmir, even today as we speak, there is a distinction between some of the groups of Islamic precepts, or some people, let's say the Wahhabis, for example, and the Salafis, for example, who are preaching a much more hardcore, much more radical line. And then there are Sufis who are driven more by the Rishi culture and the Vedic culture, etc., a combination of all of that put together. So the idea is, if we can bring Kashmir back to its old traditional strands of preaching their religion, you would have been able to achieve a fair amount of de-radicalization. So if we were to focus our efforts, if we were to make our strategy of de-radicalization to follow something like that, I see hope in trying to achieve that. At the end of the day, the goal is the same. Only thing is the intensity is very different, and of course the contours are so different from each other. Kunal, I think you had a question you had raised.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Kunal, you had raised your hand. Can you switch on your microphone?
Yes, sir. Sir, my question is, why were the Sikhs opposed to Operation Blue Star but did not have the same angst against militants with arms and ammunition being holed up in the Golden Temple? I have written the question in chat box also.
Okay, so if I have, Kunal, if I have got your question, just let me take it on the chat box also, so I'm sure what you're saying. Why were the Sikhs opposed to Operation Blue Star but did not have the same angst against militant with arms and ammunition being holed up in the Golden Temple? It's a very, very valid question. Very valid question. You see, the unfortunate thing is, okay, I'm just thinking, where do I start from? The unfortunate thing is, there were multiple things which were happening simultaneously. Okay, number one. One was this notion which was being put out by the Akali Dal, supported by the religious leaders, that the Sikh religion is being threatened by factors coming from outside. And here was a combination of economic and religious factors. Why am I saying it was economic? Because a whole lot of people from Punjab were migrating to the West. Okay, when they were migrating to the West, what was happening side by side, there was a big time mechanization of the agriculture which was happening. Okay, because of the mechanization of the agriculture, people were freeing themselves from here, migrating to the west. Whatever little menial job was being left was being opened up to migration happening from other parts of the country into Bihar, for example, from other parts of the country into Punjab, for example, from Bihar, from Uttar Pradesh, bits from Odisha, West Bengal, and so on. So the labor community was coming from there. So obviously that community which was coming in from outside were bringing their own religious practices over there. Okay, so that is on one side. On the other side, because of the Green Revolution and the effects of the Green Revolution and more produce coming out of the same field, people were starting to earn more money. Because they were starting to earn more money, they were able to contribute more money to the Gurdwara. Okay, by and large, almost everybody has a promised amount or promised percentage which they give to the Gurdwara. In fact, sitting close to, in my company headquarters, close to one of the villages, early in the morning, they would announce in the Gurdwara that Kunal Singh ji da paisa nahi aaya. The Gurdwara would announce that he has not given his contribution. So that is how they, mobilize the money anyway. So more money started coming into the Gurdwara. Because more money started coming into the Gurdwara, so the religious voice was becoming stronger. And at the same time, because more money was coming into the society, people were going in for things which were earlier considered bad in religion. Let's say consumption of alcohol, let's say watching things that you should not be watching on television and stuff like that. So all of it was being fueled by the leadership and by the religious leadership and the political leaders who are depending on the religious leaders, as all of them were threatening the Sikh religion, so to speak. Okay, and to substantiate that, you can always bring out, highlight points of discrimination by the central government, like, for example, some dam not being constructed in time, which happens with every state. But all of them was being put together to tell the people that Sikhs in Punjab are being, given a second-rate citizenship. So now you see a combination of religion, political, and economic things coming together to make a separatist kind of a movement grow. And in that process, again, it is the fault of the political leadership that people like Jarnail Singh Bhindranwale become what they become. Why did Bhindranwale become what he became? Because in those circumstances that I have just described, he was going around from places to places, not only in Punjab, other parts of India also, and giving out sermons saying that Sikhs are at a risk of being marginalized. So he becomes a popular leader. Because he becomes a popular leader, both the Congress and the Akali want his favor. You must have seen this recent movie which is there, I think in Netflix or somewhere, how that it is the same story, which was what is the name of that fellow? MSD or something like that, where that cult leader has such a great following. So when a cult leader, a religious leader has such a great following, the political leader wants his patronage. In fact, the day on which Bhindranwale had courted arrest, if you remember in that Mehta Chowk, I had given you the story last time, how every political leader of all the factions of Akali Dal went to meet with him and express solidarity with him on that morning. So the point which I'm trying to say is, when all political leaders, religious leaders start looking up at one person called Bhindranwale, he becomes a monster more than what he is. And when he says that fortifying the Golden Temple with weapons and ammunition is in the interest of the religion, people want to follow it. So therefore, they are quite okay with the Golden Temple getting desecrated by the terrorists, but they have huge angst against the kind of operation that Blue Star took place. But then Blue Star taught army the lessons, armed forces, security forces the lessons. So therefore, Black Thunder 1, 2 were executed differently. And post that, a lot of effort was put in to make sure that the sense of alienation is reduced. That feeling against the government, against the forces, that was taken care of. And again, I am repeating what I had said at the very beginning of part 1. It is actually quite a tragic part that a community which is so progressive, which is so strongly represented in every organization, whether in the public sector or private sector, has to go through a sad phase like this. So that's why I go back to what I closed my talk today with. We have to be very careful that we realize how sensitive this state is and we deal with it accordingly. Yeah, next please. I think there's a question from Molly Tiwari.
Yes, sir. Sir, she's asking whether Khalistan is still active. Molly, would you like to ask your clarify what your question is?
Good afternoon, sir. So I want to ask that Khalistan is still active today in India, or it still has any relevance in farmer protest right now?
Okay. See, now if you see, who are the people who are making the noise for Khalistan in the farmers' protest? This noise is coming, one, from Canada, the maximum, and couple of other places in the West. So really speaking, in these protests, directly or indirectly, some of these people, some of these vested interests, they see a potential to be able to exploit this situation for their own vested interests, like they had done it in the past. So, in all these situations, depending on different degrees, there is one fundamental, and that fundamental number one is the problem invariably is internal. But the manipulation or the exploitation is external.